turned up widespread fraud and corruption in college basketball. 4 assistant coaches have been arrested and are in custody, charged with accepting money to steer players towards specific agents. The 4 are former NBA star Chuck Person, now an assistant at Auburn, Emmanuel Richardson at Arizona, USC's Tony Bland, and Lamont Evans of Oklahoma State. In addition, the feds allege Adidas head of sports marketing Jim Gatto paid high school players to go to Adidas schools and then sign with Adidas later. There are other charges in here. Let's bring in our college hoops analyst now, Jay Billis. Jay, it's an age-old story. You know it well in college sports. There has always been some level of corruption. Does the scope of this feel different to you?
Well, it is different. I think there's a vast difference between some level of breaking of rules in recruiting and violations of federal law that carry up to 20 years in prison. So we're dealing with mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, schemes to steer players to different institutions and to agents, not only to shoe companies, but to agents. And as a result, the universities are claimed to have been defrauded here because all these athletes signed student-athlete statements where they agreed that they didn't violate NCAA rules. So these NCAA institutions were at risk in managing of their assets, where they could be at risk of financial harm in playing ineligible players and the like. So there's a lot of different moving parts here. But this goes way beyond sort of the garden variety violation of NCAA rules when you've got violations of federal law that carry up to 20 years in prison.
All of these are assistant coaches, Jay. What kind of exposure is there for the head coaches at those universities?
Well, it depends. According to my reading of the complaint, and I was not able to give it a full reading, but the 3 different complaints, the 4 assistant coaches that were named were at Nike schools. And so if they were operating on behalf of an agent and their institution didn't get the benefit of some of these violations and steering players to their institution, you might not see the kind of NCAA violations we've seen in the past. It's a little bit harder to believe that you would have assistant coaches doing things that wouldn't benefit their own institution and their own roster. But this was more, in my reading of the complaint, more to the benefit of agents, for the enrichment of these agents in violation of not only federal law, but certainly of NCAA rules, and putting the universities at risk for financial harm in playing ineligible players.
Jay, not just a college basketball analyst, but a lawyer and a good person to have on this story. Again, 4 assistant coaches and an Adidas executive, among others, in custody facing federal fraud and corruption charges. The U.S. attorney holding a news conference this hour. We'll have more on this later on Coast to Coast.
So, Cowboys for the win. NFL, a front office insider, Louis Riddick, joining us now here on Coast to Coast. Let's start under center. Let's talk about Dak Prescott. Some thought he might have a sophomore slump, if you will. How would you describe his play last night?
Well, I think, Kerry, it's indicative of a guy who's continuing to mature and continuing to take his game to another level in this respect. It doesn't always start off the way you want it to. It's not always a situation where everything is clicking, and in the first half you saw that. You saw that Dak was someone who needed to kind of just stick to his work, and eventually it would kind of break for him the right way. And in the second half, you saw that. You saw that this is a guy who is a dual threat, a guy who can win with his legs, a guy who can win in the pocket, a guy who can win outside the pocket, and most importantly, someone who's developing a level of trust with his wide receivers, in that he's going to take more shots down the field, and he's going to meet the challenge that defenses are posing to him, which is this: Dak, you won't throw the ball down the field. You don't have down the field winners on your football team anyway. You're just a run-centric team, and you're a conservative passer. Well, I think last night he started to prove those doubters wrong, and the fact that he is someone who will push the ball down the football field. And if they can continue to do the kind of things that they did last night, that they showed in the second half, this is a football team that I think, as you get into the months of November and December, are going to be hitting their stride, and they're going to be right where they want to be offensively.
Yeah, D. Leezy wants to hear that, but let's talk about this. You said something I thought was interesting, the level of trust he has with his wideouts. I thought, going back to last season, I thought he was forcing the ball to Dez a lot.
Yeah.
Did you see something different between that rapport? You talk about maybe a better trust, but is it trust with he and Dez? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, I think it kind of goes a little bit further than just Dez. I mean, you saw it last night. He was really starting to throw the ball to Bryce Butler as well. I think, you know, there's a lot of things that go into getting wide receivers the kind of targets that we all think that wide receivers should get. And Dez Bryant is one of those guys who, over the years, I feel as though the coaching staff, by virtue of how they decide to attack opponents and how they decide to utilize Dez, really just they neutralize him on their own. It's not necessarily Dez's issue. It's more, I think, a schematic issue. But I think overall you're starting to see that, look, Dak as a quarterback is entrusted with the franchise's fortunes every time he takes a snap, meaning he's being told, do not give it to the other team. As long as we keep it, we have a chance to win. So I think he is trusting other players that if you're not separating down the field, if it is a tight coverage situation, I'm trusting that you're going to come up with these 50-50 balls. And he did that numerous times with Bryce Butler last night, and I think that speaks to how he's taken his game to another level as far as saying, look, you guys, we don't have the kind of wide receivers that are just going to blow by people. So in order for me to take my game to another level, you have to take your game to another level. So I'm going to trust you that when I throw it up, if you don't get it, the other team doesn't get it. And I think that is going to bode well for him later on in the season.
Lou, you're smart. I'm glad when you're on the show, you explain it and make it plain. I just learned something right there. I appreciate you for doing it. You want to keep doing this thing?
Yeah, no problem.
Teaching the folks at home some things?
You just keep bringing me on.
It was a question that was asked to you earlier. Was it good Cowboys or bad Cardinals, or a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think with Dallas, they're finding ways to win football games in using a different methodology, meaning this, even though they're still a run-centric team first, and they want to run it with Zeke, and they want to go ahead and just impose their will on you, early in the season right now, they're not able to do that. So they're finding different ways to win, meaning Dak is starting to expand his game. The defense is starting to show you that, at least up front, they have a dominant pass rusher in DeMarcus Lawrence. So I think these are all things that are positives that will catapult them into the latter part of the season. With Arizona, how did they contribute to the ultimate outcome last night? Look, offensively, Carson Palmer is just not the same. He still shows it in flashes, but he's not the same as he was just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when he was a legit MVP candidate. They are having problems on the offensive line. They were missing 2 starters on the left side last night. That will just wreck your season. We've seen it wreck team seasons over the past 2 years, you know, in droves. So the Cardinals are not the same as they were. And also, when they don't have David Johnson, that obviously hamstrings their offense a little bit too. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think Dallas is going to be there in the end. I think the Cardinals are just going to fall short because I don't think they're the same team as they were a couple of years ago. They're going to need to undergo a retooling there.
You know, I wanted to go off the field. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. And let me just get to this quickly. I know that you mentioned that the protest is not about a song and some material, but how did you feel about the Cowboys' approach? How would you characterize their protest last night?
I think the Cowboys did a good job even before they got to the stadium and protested the way that they did in terms of having an organization-wide discussion about how do we all get what we want here. Look, the players wanted to display a message of unity and togetherness, as they should. And Jerry Jones wanted to be a part of that, obviously, because he took a knee with them before the flag was unfurled and then the national anthem was sung. So I commend them as an organization for taking that approach. At the same time, it's been very important to Jerry Jones in order for his football team and for his organization to respect the flag, to respect the national anthem. So they all rose together and they stood as the national anthem was sung. I think that is the kind of discourse, the kind of conversation that everybody can learn from. And I've said from the very beginning, you know, society in general needs to be looking to professional athletes and looking to professional sports team and learning a little bit of a lesson here about what teamwork really means, and stop all the dangerous and reckless rhetoric and start having some real productive conversations that, like obviously the Cowboys did, and that manifested itself in what I thought was a pretty well-organized protest last night and a pretty well-organized display of behavior.
Yeah, it was measured and it was fair. If you want to be mad, you're going to be mad, right?
That's right.
Thank you for joining us here on SportsCenter Coast to Coast, as usual.
Sure.
And I'll get back to you, David.
Okay, Carrie, we do have some news here. Dwayne Wade, we're being told, is getting close to nearing an agreement to sign with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Of course, he got the buyout from the Bulls. He could finalize this deal as early as tomorrow. ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski reporting this, according to league sources. Let's bring in another one of our guys, our NBA insider now, Brian Windhorst. Brian, what can you tell us about D. Wade to the Cavs? What do you know?
Yeah, David, the expectation is that Dwayne Wade is going to choose the Cavs and finalize the deal tomorrow after he clears waivers. A couple of the other teams that were recruiting him, including the Oklahoma City Thunder and San Antonio Spurs, have recognized that Wade is likely headed to Cleveland. But it's not a done deal, so anything can change. I got to hedge a little bit on that because we're in 2017 NBA where anything changes at a moment's notice. But it looks like Dwayne Wade is going to join his friend and former teammate LeBron James here in Cleveland in this very short term.
All right, so a reunion of those two. And now you fold this player who has been a superstar in years past. You've also got Derrick Rose, Isaiah Thomas. We heard yesterday he's expected back in January. What is D-Wade's role going to be on this team?
Well, you remember a year ago, LeBron James talking about how the Cavs were top-heavy and how they didn't have a lot of creators and guys who could, get their own shot. Look at the way this roster has been transformed. You have Derrick Rose here now. You have Isaiah Thomas when he gets healthy here now. You have Jeff Green who can do a little bit of that off the bench. And then if you add Dwayne Wade, you've completely transformed the dynamics of the way the Cavs are put together. A lot more offensive creators. In theory, you'd be able to take LeBron off the court and not lose as much offense as you saw happen over and over a year ago. Now, the one thing, Coach Ty Lue announced yesterday that Derrick Rose would be his starting point guard going forward with Isaiah Thomas out until about January with that hip injury. However, in talking to scouts and talking to people around the Cavs, putting Dwayne Wade and Derrick Rose in the same starting backcourt together, two guys who don't stretch the floor, aren't very good three-point shooters, and are guys that teams back off of, may not be the greatest fit. So there may be a little maneuvering and learning to find out the best lineups about how they all fit together. But Dwayne Wade gives the Cavs back something they lost when Kyrie Irving left, and that is a guy who in a playoff setting, when you need 2 points, you can throw him the ball and he can either create his own basket or get to the foul line. Dwayne Wade does that, as does Kyrie Irving.
Hey, Brian, of course we heard a lot from LeBron yesterday. Did he mention Dwayne Wade? I don't recall him actually getting into talking about Dwayne Wade yesterday, but can you give us sort of a feeling for what this means for LeBron to be reunited with his buddy?
Yeah, and when he talked about Dwayne yesterday, David, he was talking about him almost in the present tense, like he was on the team already, like what he can bring, what he will bring, and it was kind of a little indication that LeBron knew what Dwayne's decision was going to be. So obviously, LeBron and Dwayne have a long history of playing together. One of the things that LeBron mentioned yesterday that I would expect to see is how Dwayne played off the ball with him. It took a year in Miami to figure this out, but Dwayne Wade ended up turning into one of the finest cutters off the ball. One of the things we saw in Miami so often over those 4 years, LeBron holding the ball, teams focusing on him. Next thing you know, he zips a pass to a cutting Dwayne Wade. He had a basket or a foul or something like that. They will fall back on that. They obviously have a history of playing together. In Team USA settings as well. And all summer long, they worked out together. Also, J.R. Smith was in a lot of those workouts, working out between with LeBron and Dwayne Wade. So you'd almost think that they may have known something a while ago that Dwayne would be joining this team.
Yeah, how about it? 3 years apart from each other, and now it looks like LeBron and D-Wade are going to be back together. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting that they're close to a deal for 1 year for D-Wade. Brian Windhorst giving us the very latest from Cleveland.
We going coast to coast. We going coast to coast.